All right, welcome. Today, we are going to break down one of the most disruptive tools in a cyber attacker's arsenal, the distributed denial of service or DDoS attack. We're going to look at this from the inside, from an ethical hacker's perspective, and maybe more importantly, how we can build a solid defense against them.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First up, we've got to understand what these attacks are actually trying to accomplish. Then, we'll trace how these things have gotten way more sophisticated over the years. We'll look at the attacker's ultimate weapon, the botnet. And then we'll get to the good stuff, how the pros build a defense, and how you can actually practice this stuff safely and legally. So what exactly is a distributed denial of service attack? I mean, what's the actual goal here? Now, unlike a typical hack where someone's trying to steal your data, the goal here is way simpler and honestly, way more brutal. The whole point is just to completely overwhelm a target and make it totally unavailable for the people who are actually trying to use it. And this quote right here, it just nails the mindset. We're not talking about infiltration or sneaking past security. We're talking about digital annihilation, making a website or an entire service just vanish from the internet. So at the end of the day, these attacks are really trying to do one of two things. The first is pure brute force, overwhelm. It's like a giant fire hose of internet traffic, just so much that the pipes can't handle it. Or you can try to confuse it. You send all these weird broken requests that make the server spin its wheels trying to figure them out until it just gives up. Okay, so that's the basic idea, but here's the thing. Attackers didn't stick with this simple stuff for very long. Over time, these attacks have become way more complex and a whole lot harder to stop. You can really see the evolution here. It all started with something kind of clumsy, the ping flood. Then attackers got smarter and started exploiting the very rules of the internet with SYN floods. And now we're up against these super snaky HTTP floods that look almost exactly like real people browsing a website. Back in the day, the ping flood was a common tactic. A ping is just a simple command to see if another computer is online. Well, attackers figured, hey, what if we send 1,000,000 of these at once to the same server? But here's the thing. That attack is pretty much useless now. And you know why? Because the fix is just so easy. Any network admin can just flip a switch on their firewall and tell it to ignore all pings. Problem solved. So attackers had to get smarter. They went after something really fundamental to how the internet works, the three-way handshake. It's basically a quick conversation every computer has to connect to a server. It's like one computer says, hey, you there? The server says, yep, I'm here. And the first computer says, great, I hear you too. Boom, you're connected. So the SYN flood totally messes with that conversation. The attacker's computer says, hey, you there, thousands and thousands of times. The server, being polite, replies, yep, I'm here to every single one, and holds a spot open. But the attacker never sends that final, great, I hear you too. The server is just left hanging with all these open connections, and it just runs out of resources. And that brings us to today's big problem, the HTTP flood. This is a whole other level of sneaky. The attack uses scripts to ask for actual pages on a website, just like a real user would. For a firewall, trying to tell the difference between a bad guy and a real customer is, well, it's almost impossible. Okay, so you might be thinking, where does all this traffic actually come from? I mean, one person can't click refresh that many times. You're right, they need an army. Yeah, the real muscle behind a modern DDoS isn't one person in a basement. It's a massive, sprawling network, a botnet, that can be made up of hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions of compromised computers. A botnet is basically an army of zombie computers. And these aren't special hacker computers. We're talking about regular PCs, laptops, maybe even your smart fridge that got infected with some malware from a shady email or a bad website. And here's the craziest part. The people who own these computers, they have no clue. It could be your neighbor, your grandma. Their computer is part of a digital army, just sitting there, waiting for the signal to attack. All right, enough about the problem. Let's talk solutions. So, as a white hat, an ethical hacker, what's our game plan? How do we actually fight back against this? And that's a totally fair question. Look, let's be real. If an attack is big enough, nothing is 100% bulletproof. But a smart, layered defense can absolutely shut down the vast majority of these attacks. So what does that look like? Well, it all boils down to a few key things. First, you need well-configured firewalls with things like rate limiting to control how much traffic can come in. Second, you've got to be religious about patching your systems. Keep everything updated to close off known weak spots. Third, you want to build in redundancy. Don't have just one of anything. Use multiple servers so if one goes down, another one picks up the slack. And honestly, the best bet for many is to use big cloud-based protection services that can just absorb the attack before it even gets to you.
Okay, so this is all great to know, but how do you actually learn this stuff? How can you get your hands dirty with this without, going to jail?
All right, listen up because this is the most important thing I'm going to say. You absolutely cannot launch an attack against anybody without their clear, direct, written permission. I'm not kidding. It is super illegal and it is not a gray area. So the only way to do this right, to do it ethically, is in what we call a sandbox. Either you set up your own little lab with your own computers on your own network, or you use a target that's been specifically created for people to test on. And a perfect example of this comes from the creator of our source material. He literally gives everyone permission to attack a specific website he built for this exact purpose. That is how you learn safely. That is how you do it the right way. Because at the end of the day, all of this is a constant cat and mouse game. As soon as the defenders build a higher wall, the attackers just get a taller ladder. And it all leads to this one big question. As the game keeps evolving, who's going to have the upper hand tomorrow? The attackers or the defenders?